So far I have spoken of legs and rotary parts in Robocraft on the journey towards establishing what may be referred to as the PathForgercraft balance model for Robocraft 1. At every step of the way I shall be reaching out to the player base, yourselves, in the form of community posts that invite you to share your thoughts and discussion on the matter, and in this way one hopes that a more transparent and healthy situation arises. And if there is enough feedback on a matter, then I will also cover it as its own separate entity. The previous discussions on legs and rotaries remain open too, as shall the one for this one remain open. Consider this an open invitation to share your thoughts at any point during the process. Today I will be going over wheeler parts and providing them a similar treatment. As an aside, today's footage is a mixed bag. This match is less recent, camera control wheels having taken multiple hits in recent updates, while other matches feature recent footage. Either way, it is the side content, so I do hope that you'll find the gameplays enjoyable nonetheless. Similarly to previous videos in the series, I shall be linking to a community post where wheeler part stats, specifically those for wheels, tank tracks and skis, yes skis, as of January 2023 may be viewed and discussed, both in terms of evaluating them as well as to provide your thoughts as to the direction that you think that you might like to take them. Also, I shall at some point be linking to another community post where I outline the directions that I would like to take wheeler parts towards, and hopefully also outlining any thoughts shared by you, the community, even if that should nudge wheels, or wheelers I should say, down a different path. With that out of the way, let us go over wheelers. In Robocraft, one finds wheels, tank tracks, and skis. Wheels are the first part that were ever introduced into Robocraft, and this is also true of Robocraft 2. Wheels are responsive and fast movement ground parts that roll along the surface of the battlefield in two directions, forwards and backwards, and are also able to steer towards the left and right direction relative to themselves. They come in two variants, steering and non-steering wheels. While wheels are not themselves capable of strafe movement, they can be configured to enable sideways driving, which enables keyboard inputs to overcome camera controls inclination to turn a bot towards a camera's facing direction. Wheels are susceptible to flipping as they have no self-stabilizing aspect to them. They have hitboxes of various sizes, from the very small to the rather sizable, and they are of moderate weight. Wheel bots can be made of any material. Heavier bot steering were more stable for keyboard control vehicles, while now all weights of keyboard control part steering have been improved, at the expense of camera control steering, which have been pushed into understeer territory. The most successful cars tend to incorporate either rudders or insect legs, so as to change a bot's overall handling characteristics, and both of these help with the aforementioned stability issues that wheels have. Tank tracks, on the other hand, are somewhat slower than wheels, much heavier, significantly more sluggish, and are significantly tougher. These ground movement parts are able to move similarly to wheels, except that tank tracks are also able to rotate in place. They have a much bigger hitbox, but also have more connection points to augment their effective toughness. Effective tank bots are few and far between. They lack in the mobility department, and their toughness doesn't quite make up for it. However, tank tracks can be made of any material. They do not gain anything significant from being lightweight, and so they tend to be made from heavier parts. Also, unlike other movement parts, tank tracks are unique in that they have a further Achilles heel in the form of Teslas, because they just don't have the mobility to counter them, generally speaking. Skis are special. Skis are potentially an extremely fast ground movement part. I say potentially because they have a much higher base speed than wheels, but they also have no power of their own. Skis on their own just won't move. Instead, they are the only movement parts in the game that rely upon speed booster parts, mainly but not exclusively thrusters and propellers, which also have their own movement thrust impetus to get up to speed. However, when they move, they behave similarly to non-steering wheels. That applies to both steering and non-steering skis, as at some point in the past, the steering mechanism for skis simply broke, and so ski bots depend on other movement parts and camera controls plus tilt in order to be controllable. Due to their relatively broken nature, both ski parts have been given significant buffs in both health and speed boost by the balance server in the past, and this is one of those times when I'm not entirely against their direction on this. Skis in themselves do not appear to care about the mass of the bots, but the parts that propel them forward do. As such, most effective ski bots tend to be made of lighter materials. That covers pure movement part bots, but there are various hybrid bot types that come from mixing and matching parts, and so it would do well to cover these also. As mentioned prior, more effective wheel bots tend to be stabilized by other movement parts. The most common part to combine with wheels would be insect legs, and depending on how they are installed, they can prove to be more or less dominant than wheels in performance. The more dominant the installation, the more able the hybrid bot is to climb up surfaces and jump. The less dominant the installation, the more able the bot is to retain the higher base speed of the wheels. In either case, when the legs on a bot are in a state of jumping, they frequently, but do not always, exert a limited degree of mid-air stabilization, and this is really beneficial to wheels in general. Other kinds of legs do not really benefit wheels in any meaningful way. Wheels and tank tracks can be combined, but will tend to result in a slower overall vehicle. Wheels and skis are a combination that has become more intriguing specifically because skis now apply a generous enough amount of speed boost to rival thrusters. It has not been fully explored, but there is much potential. Wheels and hovers are not regularly seen in combination with each other, as hovers modestly slow down the base speed of the bot in total. On the other hand, hovers can offer improved stability while in the air and can prevent flipping, but also impose a braking effect while off the ground, and so can end up being more of a hindrance than of benefit. That covers ground movement part combinations. Now onto the air movement part combinations. The primary alternative movement part that tends to be combined is rudders, particularly of the vertical kind, as these allow a player to more directly control the roll of a car while in flight, and sometimes also to right a vehicle even when it is already flipped. Otherwise, combining wheels and aerofoils is not a common choice, as they do not really benefit much from each other. Wheels may serve as backup movement parts for when aerofoils get taken out, but not much else. Rotors combine even less well due to the reduced base speed that comes with them. They can help get a wheelbot up to places that they otherwise would not be able to, but insect legs would simply do it better, in most cases at least. With regards to tank tracks, much of what was said for wheel combinations also apply for tank track combinations with some differences. Insect legs are also increasingly popular combinations with tank tracks, and this mostly with insect legs being incorporated more dominantly. There is presently nothing to lose in terms of base speed, and insect legs provide greater overall mobility. A few of these hybrids do pretty well. Combining tracks with other kinds of legs is usually in a form where the tank track is either a backup movement part or a glorified chassis part incorporated into a mech build, rarely a sprinter build. Their raw part toughness and multiple connection points help bring about the situation. Hover tank track builds are uncommon but do exist, as hovers do not really detract from track's overall functionality. They can offer greater stability, but also greater airtime, meaning a modestly greater vulnerability to flak. Skis are a more interesting prospect thanks to the added speed boost, but is an otherwise niche choice not commonly seen. Any form of aerofoil with tank tracks is an unlikely combination, but might be opted for backup movement purposes. Rotors are a modestly better but still unlikely choice, providing more access to high ground, but still don't work well with tank tracks in general. So, okay, moving on to skis. As for ski bot hybrids, the increase in their speed boost values has meant that they have seen an increase in their use, but as speed boost parts. In terms of hybrids, I have primarily seen them used in conjunction with insect legs. However, as mentioned earlier, they could combine somewhat well with either wheels or tank tracks, and some players might include them as backup moving parts on their flying bots, although this is far from common. One last thing, since skis are rather tough in their own right, there is always that little bit of potential that we might see them used as a chassis part, but their connection points make this a less likely prospect. Okay, so that covers wheels, tracks and skis, as well as most variants associated with these parts. A further dive into Digo Booster's master sheet of Robocraft part stats is what came next, and as per usual, I've linked Digo Booster's sheet in the description, as it is a very useful source for information about the full set of Robocraft parts as of at the moment. The actual stats for these wheeler parts are linked below. I will focus on the interesting aspects so as to keep things relatively short. All the more so since agility stats for these parts are much simpler than those I've spoken about thus far. All of these have values for the light and heavy ends of bots. The first field of interest, with regards to wheels, would be steering speed, and this just refers to the base speed of a bot while steering. Pretty straightforward. Then one comes to the steering force multiplier, and here's where things get interesting. You see, as of at the moment, the values for both light and heavy bots have been set to being equal to each other, and this following several consecutive reductions in the light stat, which has been good for keyboard control vehicles, but not so much for camera control vehicles, resulting in understeer. Following this, one finds the lateral acceleration field. There are two ways that I could interpret this. On the one hand, it could determine how much drift one gets from turning laterally. This would be cool to explore if so. On the other hand, and this is my suspicion, it could refer to how long it takes a vehicle to reach top steering speed while steering. The reason why I think this latter interpretation is the correct interpretation comes down to the next stat, acceleration time. Here one finds that the acceleration time for heavy vehicles matches the value for both light and heavy in the lateral acceleration field. The final stat to get into here is brake force, and while it is obvious that this pertains to braking, the precise impact of the values are a little less clear. With that said, let's move on to tank tracks. Moving on to tank tracks, the first notable thing that I would like to point out is that these have a health boost stat. A relic from the damage boost era of Robocraft, this has been set to 0%, and the same has been true for mech legs. Next up, one finds moving turn rate, the rate at which the bot turns while moving. Next up, one finds the stopped turn rate, the rate at which the bot turns while stationary. Then one finds turn acceleration and again lateral acceleration. That tank tracks would have a lateral acceleration field but no acceleration field has me wondering whether the core acceleration field is missing from the list of available stats, or whether this actually determines how fast the tracks accelerate while driving sideways. It would certainly be nice to clear the uncertainty. That's all for tracks, and now we come to skis. The only noteworthy thing about skis' agility fields is that they do not appear to have any agility stats, aside from speed boost. They also do not themselves have a weight agility limit, but lacking any power of their own, they are subject to the agility weight limitations of other parts paired with. In fact, they kind of work like non-steering wheels if wheels had no power of their own. There is one important thing to note about skis though, as was pointed out by a player named Gaihor. And this is that the steering ski is technically the better ski of the two, not because it can steer, which it sadly cannot, but because its center of mass is much lower than that of the non-steering counterparts. Interesting. Well, this was a roundup offering partial insight into the back end of wheelers in Robocraft. All of the various fields mentioned are among those which FreeJam could modify fewer than with other parts, and again the mass of a part cannot be modified as of at the moment. As mentioned before, any asks of FreeJam concerning adjustments should be made with responsibility, as the modification of even a single part can have a domino effect upon the balance of other parts. Being transparent with one's reasoning is a start, and that is precisely what you shall get from me. Before I do get into sharing my thoughts on perspective balance, I would appreciate if you were to look upon wheels, tracks and skis and ask the questions. What role does this part play? Where might that part fit in upon a bot in place of other potentially competing movement parts? How does this movement part measure up against others? Do these parts carve a niche with their own identity? What issues, if any, do these parts introduce? As before, I would like you to try and think not on behalf of how you would want the part to serve you. Rather, I would prefer that you think in terms of how the movement part serves the game, or at least to think in terms of what would be in the best interests of the parts themselves. When this video continues, I will share my overall thoughts concerning the direction that I would like wheelers to take. Do feel free to pause the video should you like to think about the balance of wheelers without my influence. Okay, have you given this thought? Continuing in 3, 2, 1. My view on the potential benefits of cloning parts with the aim of creating interesting variants and enriching the game is not new. However, in the case of wheels, I would say that the importance of this extends beyond just creating interesting variants. Rather, it is a matter of satisfying different kinds of users with different needs, namely those who use keyboard controls and those who use camera controls. The fact of the matter is that the steering sensitivity level requirements suitable for each of these differs drastically, and while I am genuinely happy for keyboard control vehicles finally being in a good place, I am a camera control wheels player and I cannot deny that wheels feel worse for me as a result. So yes, the cloning of a set of wheels for this purpose alone would indeed be a boon, and one could probably get away with only adding the steering variants of the wheels for this purpose. Just call the new wheels cam wheel steering or something. Of course, wheels are not the only kinds of parts that could benefit from cloning. Ironically, considering how similarly wheels and skis behave, it might be possible to clone a wheel and stat it with the purpose of serving as a substitute for skis. In this regard, it would be ideal if one could trade the hitbox and model and connections of the cloned wheel with that of the ski that it's replacing, but I am uncertain as to whether this would even be a possibility, let alone feasible. But if such were to be feasible, then that could be a way to fix the properties of skis by replacing them with non-broken parts. Although even in this case it would be a good idea to keep the broken part in existence. I shall be taking a stab at this, keeping in mind that unlike the actual ski parts, wheels turned skis would have their own drive power. One could also look into cloning tank tracks, but it is not immediately clear as to what alternative niche could be filled by an alternative tank track part, as differing from straight up improving the tank track parts themselves. But that was all about the potential of cloned movement parts. It is time to think about the potential future for wheelers as movement parts in general. So, beginning with wheels. Overall, wheels fill the role that is best suited for them. They are fast ground-moving parts, which are most limited to the horizontal plane and have limited ability to take advantage of the verticality of maps, as one would expect wheels to be. Wheels are fast and they are tough. The most prevalent problem is the tug-of-war that is occurring between those of us who use camera controls and those whom use keyboard controls, and for some time now the hands have been pulling the way of keyboard controls, with the result of camera control wheels being weaker on steering than they have ever been. As such, this is an issue that I would like to address, taking a hold of that rope in favor of camera controls and giving it a modest enough pull to restore some of the fluidity of such controls. Again here, I do believe that the best option is to clone the steering wheels and to have the clones statted with camera controls in mind, while also allowing the other less responsive wheels for keyboard control enjoyers to continue to exist. An alternative here might be to look to the non-steering variants of wheels as a last-ditch effort to bring keyboard control players their desired steering sensitivity without sacrificing that of camera control players. But this may impact the movement of bots that do opt for non-steering wheels already. This is not the only issue that I would like to address, however. Another issue is that non-steering wheels seem to lack a true purpose in the game. Yes, they can be used along the center line, or even towards the back of vehicles as with normal front steering cars, but as parts they otherwise have nothing going for them, as compared to their steering counterparts, and some players frankly just do not use them. As such, it seems to me that these wheels of lesser functionality could gain purpose through either enhancing their toughness, or their speed contribution, and so this is the way that I went, more or less. A further issue that I sought to address is the anomaly where, unlike most other parts, the multi-connection Tier 5 wheels do not take the reduction in health to help balance it that other parts do. It seems that a happy medium could be struck in this regards, and a balance towards this has been attempted. That covers wheels. Now we come to tank tracks, and here too there are a number of issues that one seeks to address. And in this regards, I will be bringing forward several hot takes, but first a not so hot take. Tank tracks as they exist today are pretty poor moving parts, and efforts to make them not suck have brought them closer to being tougher multi-connection point wheels with worse mobility and less speed. This I address on two fronts, and here come the hot takes. Firstly, health boost. This is a stat that some players are heavily against seeing return into general circulation within Robocraft 1. Health boost is a value that enhances the health of not only just the tank tracks themselves, but all parts on the bot concerned. The main concern never was as concerns the potential toughness of tank bots themselves, but rather such concerned the potential toughness of other kinds of builds into which tank tracks could potentially be incorporated, specifically so as to benefit from their toughness or prospective health boost. At the same time, it is strongly my view that tank tracks will never be taken seriously as a movement part unless they have something going for them. As such, it was necessary to seek a means to reconcile both introducing that which tank tracks needed, while also addressing the legitimate concerns surrounding the potential for tank tracks to be abused for health. It is the case that the most popular tank tracks for such improper use would be the smaller, lower tier tracks. While it would be possible for larger tank tracks to be improperly used, those things are massive, and a lot less spammable for the purpose. A further consideration was the weight and cost of the tank tracks. When considering the potential of a movement part to be improperly used as a chassis part, one does need to look at the chassis parts and compare the value that one is getting in terms of health, weight, and the cost of that value. It occurred to me that it may be desirable to treat tank tracks such that different tiers offer a different level of mobility and toughness, and the decision was made to afford lower tier tank tracks greater mobility at the expense of a lower toughness. Since compromises on health boost at the lower tiers are necessary, and since relative mobility does not mean a whole lot to tank tracks, it remained necessary to seek other ways to ensure that lower tier tank tracks remain an interesting choice for their intended use purpose. And so the choice was made to do that which I would normally frown upon, the reduction of lower tier tank tracks' CPU cost. The primary reasons as to why I feel that a CPU reduction is justified in this case is that there is such a thing as too small a CPU cost difference between different tiers of tracks. Such a small CPU difference, which is what we currently have, is somewhat illogical, and this coupled with the relatively trash tier status of tracks, as we know them, inspired me to make downward adjustments in costs accordingly. One benefit of this is that scaling benefits like health could be cut accordingly, while the weights of the tracks would remain the same, resulting in a greater weight per CPU, rendering tracks less suitable for chassis purposes on any build types that cared about weight. Those are the main issues that were addressed in these prospective tank track changes, and I am fairly confident that these represent a sizable improvement overall. In lower tiers, tank tracks would be tougher than wheels, but not particularly tougher than the chassis parts available. At those tiers also, the health boost would be relatively small, reflective of not needing to deal with the same degree of air supremacy as higher tier track bots would. And at the higher tiers, tank tracks would be the slowest moving parts on the field, but those bots would be going nowhere fast, and everything benefits from their relatively hefty health boost, including any installed weapons and modules. And this is where tank tracks would finally be able to shine. Higher tier tank track bots would still generally be unable to outmaneuver Tesla bots or other threats, but their sheer toughness would ensure that they have more of a fighting chance regardless. Health boost would also help to set tank tracks further apart from mech legs, which would instead be parts with better raw part health, but likely no health boost to offer. For those of you following along, we are now 3 videos into this series. It is my hope that you already see the emerging potential of the PathForgercraft balance model as regards the future of Robocraft 1, where balance and build diversity are both given due service. With that out of the way, let us move on to skis. In truth, there really isn't much that can be done with skis at this point, and I covered the most promising option while discussing wheels, with a wheel part being cloned for the purpose of taking the role of a ski. However, I do note that there are 2 ski parts, the steering ski and the non-steering ski, and we've already established that the steering skis are the better overall skis due to having a better hitbox or build box, and a lower center of mass. As such, it is tempting to mess around with the objectively inferior non-steering ski with the aim of giving them something interesting to offer as compared to their better counterparts. And that really comes down to either the part health or the speed boost or possibly even the CPU cost. If they had more possibilities, there would be a lot more to say here, but sadly they do not. So there we have it. Significant change proposals with the aim of making Robocraft itself Robocraft but better, at least in terms of the balance and the possibilities that such feeds into. So that's all from me, and now over to you, the viewer. Did you come up with ideas concerning a plausible direction that wheeler moving parts could be taken? What are your thoughts concerning the proposals for wheelers outlined here? What impacts, if any, do you expect to see? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. I will meet you there, and of course, thank you for watching.